The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered onto the cracked driveway, echoing through the quiet suburban night like a gunshot. I was underneath my ancient Volvo, wrestling with a stubborn oil pan bolt, when Emily's voice drifted through the kitchen window above me. "No, he suspects nothing," she whispered into her phone, her tone sickeningly sweet. "I'll tell him I'm at Dad's again. See you at the club in 20. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Club, I thought, wiping motor oil on my already stained coveralls. Since when did my wife of 12 years join any club that didn't involve overpriced wine and complaining about her associates at the law firm? I slid out from under the car, my back protesting against the cold concrete. The kitchen light cast Emily's silhouette against the window. She was pacing, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing with her free hand like she always did when she was lying to a client. Or apparently, to me. "He's always in that stupid garage anyway," she continued, unaware that her husband was listening to every word. "Working on that piece of junk car or heading to Red's gym. I swear, sometimes I think he loves that boxing bag more than me." Well, Emily, I thought grimly, at least the boxing bag doesn't lie to my face every night. I'd been Samuel Carter for 42 years, Sam to my friends, Sammy to Red at the gym, and apparently he to my own wife when she thought I couldn't hear. I was a mechanical engineer at a mid-sized firm downtown, the kind of guy who fixed things for a living and believed problems had solutions if you just applied the right pressure in the right place. But this problem, this growing distance between Emily and me, had been eating at me for months. The late nights at the office that stretched later and later, the new clothes, the expensive perfume, the way she'd started going to the gym religiously after years of calling my boxing workouts barbaric. "I miss you too," Emily cooed into the phone, and my stomach clenched like I'd taken a body shot from Red's heaviest bag. I gathered my tools quietly, my mind racing. Emily worked at Patterson, Klein & Associates, one of those glass tower law firms where everyone wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She'd started there as a paralegal 8 years ago and clawed her way up to associate, working nights and weekends, missing dinners and anniversaries in pursuit of that partnership track. I'd been proud of her ambition then. Now I wondered if I'd been a fool. The kitchen window slammed shut, and I heard Emily's heels clicking across the hardwood floor toward the front door. I stayed crouched behind my car, watching through the gap between the bumper and the ground as her legs appeared, black stockings, expensive shoes I didn't recognize. "Sam?" she called out, her voice artificially bright. "I'm heading to Dad's to help with his taxes. Don't wait up." I could have answered. Should have answered. Instead, I watched my wife of 12 years walk to her Honda Civic, the sensible car we'd bought together 3 years ago, and drive away into the night to meet some mystery man at some mystery club. The irony wasn't lost on me. Emily was supposedly helping her father George with his taxes, but I knew for a fact that George had finished his taxes 2 weeks ago. He'd called me to brag about his refund, the way he did every year. George Hendricks was a retired accountant who'd raised Emily alone after her mother died when Emily was 16. He was methodical, punctual, and finished his taxes on January 31st every year without fail. He was also the closest thing to a father I'd ever had, since my own dad had decided a bottle of whiskey was better company than his family when I was 10. I pulled out my phone and stared at George's number for a long moment. It was past 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. He'd be in his recliner, watching whatever game was on ESPN, probably nursing his second beer of the evening. Instead of calling, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to drive over there. The 15-minute drive to George's house gave me time to think, and thinking was dangerous territory these days. Emily and I had been growing apart for months, maybe longer. The closeness had become routine, then infrequent, then practically non-existent. She blamed stress from work, the pressure of making partner, the long hours. I'd blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't ambitious enough for her anymore. Maybe she was embarrassed by my blue-collar job, my calloused hands, the way I preferred a beer and a boxing match to wine and whatever pretentious art gallery opening she wanted to drag me to. But lying? That was new territory. George's craftsman-style house sat on a tree-lined street in the older part of town, the kind of neighborhood where people still knew their neighbors' names and borrowed cups of sugar. His porch light was on, and I could see the blue glow of his television through the living room window. I parked across the street and sat in my truck for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. What was I doing? Checking up on my wife like some paranoid husband in a bad movie? But I was a paranoid husband, wasn't I? And this was starting to feel like a very bad movie. I walked up George's front steps and knocked. The door opened almost immediately, revealing George in his standard evening uniform, boxers, undershirt, and slippers that had seen better decades. "Sam?" He looked genuinely surprised. "What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" "Hey, George," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just wanted to see how you were doing. Emily said she was coming over to help with your taxes tonight." George's bushy eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Taxes? Son, I finished those 2 weeks ago. You know me. Early bird gets the worm and all that." He stepped aside to let me in. "Emily's not here. Haven't seen her since Sunday dinner." The living room was exactly as I'd expected. George in his recliner, a half-empty beer on the side table, a Cubs game on the television. No sign that anyone else had been there, certainly no sign of Emily and her tax preparation supplies. "You sure she said she was coming here?" George asked, settling back into his chair and muting the TV. "That's what she told me," I said, sinking onto his couch. The same couch where Emily and I had spent countless Sunday afternoons when we were dating, back when she'd curl up against my side and steal bites of whatever dessert George had attempted that week. George studied my face with the sharp eyes that had made him a successful accountant for 35 years. "Sam, what's going on? You look like someone stole your lunch money." I almost laughed. George had a way of cutting through bullshit that I'd always admired. It was probably where Emily had learned to be so direct in her legal work. Too bad she hadn't inherited his honesty. "I think Emily might be—" I started, then stopped. "How do you tell your father-in-law that you suspect his daughter is cheating on you?" "I think we might be having some problems." George leaned forward, his expression serious. "What kind of problems?" "The kind where she tells me she's helping you with taxes when she's actually going to meet someone at a club." The silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant sound of the Cubs striking out again. George's face went through several expressions: surprise, disappointment, and finally a weary sadness that made him look every one of his 68 years. "Ah, hell," he said quietly. "I was hoping I was wrong." "Wrong about what?" George got up and walked to the kitchen, returning with 2 beers. He handed me one and sat back down, taking a long pull before answering. "She's been different lately," he said. "When she comes for Sunday dinner, she's, I don't know, distracted, checking her phone constantly, smiling at text messages, and she's been asking a lot of questions about divorce law." The beer turned to acid in my stomach. "Divorce law?" "Said it was for a client, but Emily's never handled divorce cases. She's corporate law through and through." George shook his head. "I didn't want to believe it, but when you showed up here tonight—" We sat in silence for a while, watching the Cubs lose to the Cardinals in spectacular fashion. It seemed fitting somehow, everything falling apart at once. "What are you going to do?" George asked finally. I'd been asking myself the same question. The old Sam, the Sam who believed in fixing things, would have confronted Emily directly. We'd have had a long, painful conversation, maybe gone to counseling, tried to work it out. But something had shifted inside me tonight. Maybe it was hearing the casual way she'd dismissed me on that phone call, or the realization that she'd been lying to both George and me for who knows how long. Maybe it was the fact that she was out there right now, with some other man, while I sat in her father's living room drinking beer and watching baseball. "I'm going to find out who he is," I said. George nodded slowly. "And then?" "Then I'm going to make sure she knows that I know." "Sam," George said carefully, "whatever you're thinking of doing, just be smart about it, okay? Emily's my daughter, and I love her, but if she's doing what we think she's doing, she's making her own bed." I finished my beer and stood up. "Thanks, George, for the beer and for being honest with me." "Sam," George called as I reached the door. "For what it's worth, she's an idiot if she's throwing away what you two have." I drove home slowly, my mind churning with possibilities. Emily's car wasn't in the driveway when I arrived, which meant she was still out with her mystery man. I had time to think, to plan. Inside our house, the house we'd bought together 5 years ago, the house where we'd talked about having kids someday, the house that now felt like a mausoleum of broken promises. I poured myself a whiskey and sat at the kitchen table. Emily's laptop was sitting on the counter, closed, but not password protected. She'd always been careless about security, trusting that I wasn't the type of husband who snooped through his wife's personal things. She was right. I hadn't been that type of husband. But I was now. The laptop opened to her email, and it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Dinner reservations at expensive restaurants I'd never been to, hotel confirmations for weekend work conferences that didn't exist, and messages. God, the messages. His name was Nick Russo, but everyone called him Pumper. He was a junior partner at Emily's firm, 35 years old, divorced, and apparently spent more time at the gym than he did practicing law. The messages between them went back 4 months, starting professional and gradually becoming more intimate. "Can't wait to see you tonight," read the most recent one, sent just an hour ago. "Same place as last week. I'll make sure we get our usual table." Our usual table. They had a usual table. I closed the laptop and finished my whiskey, feeling something cold and hard settling in my chest. Emily thought she was so smart, so careful. She thought I was just some dumb engineer who wouldn't notice the signs, wouldn't put the pieces together. She was about to learn how wrong she was. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Dad's taxes are more complicated than we thought. Going to be really late. Don't wait up. Love you." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "No problem. Take your time." But I wasn't going to take my time. I was going to take my time planning something that would make Emily Hendricks Carter very, very sorry she'd ever decided to lie to me. Friday morning arrived with the kind of gray, drizzling rain that made everything look like a crime scene. Perfect weather for what I had in mind. Emily came home at 2:30 in the morning, slipping into bed like a ghost, smelling of expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. She was asleep when I left for work at 7, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face peaceful in a way that made me want to shake her awake and demand answers. Instead, I went to work and spent the day designing a trap. At Patterson, Klein & Associates, Emily worked on the 15th floor of a glass tower downtown. I'd been there exactly 3 times in the 8 years she'd worked there, once for her promotion party, once for the firm's Christmas party, and once to pick her up when her car was in the shop. Each time, I'd felt like a fraud in my best suit, surrounded by people who spoke in legal jargon and measured success in billable hours. But I knew the building's layout, and more importantly, I knew Emily's schedule. She had a standing lunch meeting every Friday with the other associates, a networking thing that was supposedly crucial for her career advancement. It meant she'd be out of her office from noon to 2, giving me plenty of time to do some reconnaissance. I took a long lunch and drove downtown, parking in the visitor section of the building's garage. The security guard barely glanced at my visitor's badge as I took the elevator to the 15th floor. Patterson, Klein and Associates occupied half the floor, all glass walls and expensive furniture designed to intimidate clients into paying higher fees. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that could cut glass, looked up as I approached. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to surprise my wife," I said, putting on my most charming smile. "Emily Carter? It's our anniversary." The lie came easier than I'd expected. Our real anniversary was in October, but the receptionist didn't need to know that. "Oh, how sweet," she gushed. "But I think Emily's at lunch right now. Would you like to wait in her office?" Actually, I was hoping to find out where she went to lunch. I thought I might crash the party, you know? The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "I'm not sure I should." "It's okay," said a voice behind me. "I can help him." I turned to see a woman in her early 30s, tall and athletic with short red hair and intelligent green eyes. She was wearing a tailored business suit that screamed middle management. "I'm Becca Walsh," she said, extending her hand. "I work in HR. You must be Sam. Emily talks about you all the time." Funny, I thought. Emily had never mentioned anyone named Becca Walsh. "Nice to meet you," I said, shaking her hand. "I was just trying to track down my wife for a lunch surprise." Becca glanced at the receptionist, then back at me. "Actually, I think Emily mentioned she was meeting a client at Marcello's today. You know, that Italian place on 5th Street? I knew Marcello's. It was the kind of restaurant where a salad cost $30 and they brought you bread you didn't ask for. More importantly, it was the same restaurant mentioned in several of Emily's email confirmations. "Thanks," I said. "I really appreciate it." "No problem," Becca said, but something in her eyes suggested she knew more than she was letting on. "I hope you two have a lovely lunch." I left the building with more questions than answers, but at least I had a location. Marcello's was only 6 blocks away, and if Emily was there with Pumper Russo, I'd finally have visual confirmation of what I already knew in my gut. The restaurant sat on a corner lot, all dark wood and tinted windows, the kind of place that charged extra for atmosphere. I parked across the street and settled in to wait. I didn't have to wait long. At 12:45, Emily's Honda Civic pulled into the valet parking area. She got out wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled in loose waves that framed her face perfectly. She looked beautiful, confident, and happy in a way I hadn't seen in months. She also looked like a woman meeting her lover for lunch. 2 minutes later, a red Porsche 911 pulled up behind her car. The man who got out was everything I'd expected and worse. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile was blindingly white, and when he wrapped his arms around my wife and kissed her in full view of anyone who cared to look, I felt something snap inside my chest. Nick Pumper. Russo was everything I wasn't. Flashy, expensive, and apparently irresistible to my wife of 12 years. I sat in my truck and watched them disappear into the restaurant, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Part of me wanted to march in there and confront them both, make a scene that would end up on social media and destroy both their careers. But that would be emotional, reactive, stupid. And despite what Emily apparently thought of me, I wasn't stupid. I was methodical. I was patient. And I was very, very good at solving problems. I drove back to work and spent the rest of the day researching Nick Russo. The internet made it easy. LinkedIn profile, Facebook page, Instagram account full of gym selfies and pictures of expensive meals. He'd been divorced for 2 years, lived in a luxury condo downtown, and drove that ridiculous Porsche like it was compensation for something. He was also, according to several online reviews and a few carefully worded complaints on legal forums, known for his aggressive tactics and questionable ethics. The kind of lawyer who gave lawyers a bad name, which was saying something. More interesting was what I found about his personal life. Pumper Russo had a reputation as a player, a guy who dated his way through the firm's support staff and junior associates like he was working through a menu. Emily wasn't his first affair with a married colleague, and she probably wouldn't be his last. That night, Emily came home at her usual time, carrying takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and acting like nothing had changed. "How was your day?" she asked, setting the food on the kitchen table. Same old," I said, opening a beer and settling into my chair. "How was yours?" "Busy. Had lunch with the other associates, then spent the afternoon preparing for a deposition." The lies rolled off her tongue so smoothly, I almost admired the skill. "This pad thai smells amazing, doesn't it?" We ate dinner like a normal married couple, discussing mundane things, the weather, the neighbors, whether we needed to call someone about the leak in the upstairs bathroom. Emily smiled and laughed at my jokes, asked about my day, even suggested we watch a movie together after dinner. It was a masterful performance, and it made me hate her just a little bit more. After dinner, while Emily was in the shower, I went through her purse. Her credit card statements showed charges at restaurants, hotels, and boutiques I'd never heard of, cash withdrawals that were larger and more frequent than usual, a receipt from Victoria's Secret for lingerie I'd definitely never seen. But the most interesting thing I found was a business card tucked into the zippered compartment of her wallet. Nick Russo, junior partner, Patterson, Klein & Associates. On the back, written in Emily's handwriting, was a phone number and the words, "private line." I photographed everything with my phone, then put it all back exactly as I'd found it. That weekend, Emily announced she was going to a legal conference in Springfield. "It's just for the day," she said, packing an overnight bag that suggested otherwise. "Some of us might stay over if the sessions run late." "Sounds important," I said from the bedroom doorway, watching her fold clothes I'd never seen into a suitcase I didn't recognize. "It could be good for my career," she said without looking at me. "You know how competitive things are at the firm." I knew all right. I was starting to understand exactly how competitive things were. After Emily left on Saturday morning, I drove over to George's house. I found him in his garage, tinkering with an old lawnmower that had seen better decades. "Sam," he said, looking up from the engine, "didn't expect to see you today. Where's Emily?" "Legal conference in Springfield," I said. "Mind if I help?" George handed me a wrench and we worked in comfortable silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of mechanical troubleshooting providing a welcome distraction from the mess my marriage had become. "So," George said finally, "did you find out who he is?" I told him about Nick Russo, about the lunch at Marcello's, about the business card hidden in Emily's wallet. George listened without interrupting, his face growing grimmer with each detail. "Pumper Russo," he said when I finished. "Christ, Sam, I know that name." "You do?" "He handled my neighbor's divorce last year, took the guy for everything he was worth, then started dating his ex-wife before the ink was dry on the papers." George shook his head. "He's got a reputation for being a shark, even by lawyer standards." "Well, he's about to find out what it feels like to be the fish." George looked at me sharply. "What are you planning, Sam?" "I'm planning to give Emily exactly what she wants," I said. "A choice between her husband and her boyfriend, but I'm going to make sure she understands the consequences of that choice before she makes it." "How?" I smiled, and it felt cold and sharp as a blade. "I'm going to invite you over for dinner tomorrow night. A nice family meal, just the three of us. Emily can explain to her father where she's been spending her time lately." George's eyes widened. "Sam, you can't just—" "Can't what? Can't expect my wife to be honest with her own father? Can't ask her to explain why she's been lying to both of us for months?" I set down the wrench and looked George in the eye. "She's been playing games, George. It's time to change the rules." Sunday evening I prepared for Emily's return like a general preparing for battle. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, bought groceries for Emily's favorite meal, and called George to confirm dinner for 7 o'clock. Emily arrived home at 6:30, looking flushed and satisfied in a way that made my stomach turn. She kissed my cheek like a dutiful wife and started unpacking her overnight bag. "How was the conference?" I asked. "Informative," she said. "Lots of networking opportunities." "I'll bet," I thought. "That's great, honey. I hope you're not too tired, because I invited your dad over for dinner. He should be here any minute." Emily froze, a silk blouse half folded in her hands. "You what?" "I invited George for dinner. You know, family time. I thought it would be nice to hear about your conference." "Sam, I'm exhausted. Can't we do this another night?" "He's already on his way," I said, enjoying the panic that flickered across her face. "Besides, you love spending time with your dad." The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock because George was nothing if not punctual. I opened the door to find him standing on our front porch, holding a bottle of wine and looking like a man about to attend his own execution. "George!" I said loudly enough for Emily to hear. "Come on in. Emily's just telling me about her legal conference in Springfield." Emily appeared in the living room doorway, her smile so forced it looked painful. "Hi, Dad." "Emily," George said carefully, "how was your conference?" "It was fine," Emily said, shooting me a look that could have melted steel. "Very educational." We sat down to dinner, pot roast, mashed potatoes, and green beans, all of Emily's childhood favorites. I played the perfect host, refilling wine glasses and asking George about his week, building up to the moment I'd been planning since Friday afternoon. "So, Emily," I said as we finished the main course, "tell your dad about the conference. What kind of sessions did you attend?" Emily's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Oh, you know, the usual. Contract law updates, ethical considerations, that sort of thing." "Sounds fascinating," George said, and I could hear the strain in his voice. "Where exactly was it held?" The Marriott," Emily said after a slight hesitation. "Downtown Springfield." I pulled out my phone and set it on the table. "That's funny," I said conversationally, "because I tried to call you yesterday to see how it was going, but the Marriott Springfield said they didn't have any legal conferences booked this weekend." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily stared at my phone like it was a snake, her face going pale under her carefully applied makeup. "Actually," I continued, "they said they didn't have an Emily Carter registered at all. Isn't that strange?" George set down his wine glass with a soft clink that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet dining room. "Sam," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can," I said, my voice still conversational, still friendly. "But first, why don't you explain to your father why you've been lying to him about doing his taxes? You know, the taxes he finished 2 weeks ago?" Emily's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like the scared 16-year-old girl who'd lost her mother and clung to her father like he was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. "Dad, George held up his hand, stopping her mid-sentence. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and disappointed in a way that was worse than any shouting could have been. "Emily, where were you this weekend?" She looked back and forth between us, trapped and desperate. I was with someone from work." "Someone?" I asked. "Or someone specific? Someone named Nick Russo?" The name hit her like a physical blow. She actually flinched, her hands trembling as she set down her fork. How did I find out?" I laughed, and it sounded bitter even to my own ears. "Emily, you left his business card in your wallet. You've been charging romantic dinners to our joint credit card. You smell like his cologne every time you come home from one of your late nights at the office." George's face had gone from disappointed to furious. "Emily Catherine Hendricks Carter," he said, using her full name like he had when she was a child caught in a lie. "Are you having an affair?" Emily burst into tears, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she gasped. It just It started as nothing, just lunch meetings, and then you decided your marriage vows were optional, I suggested. You don't understand, Emily said, wiping her eyes with her napkin. Sam, we've been growing apart for months. You're always at work or at that gym, and I was lonely and Nick was there, and he understood the pressure I was under. So you decided to screw him, I said flatly. George slammed his hand down on the table, making the dishes jump. Emily, how could you? Sam's been nothing but good to you, and this is how you repay him? Dad, please. No, George said, standing up from the table. I raised you better than this. Your mother would be ashamed. That was a low blow, and we all knew it. Emily's sobs got louder, more desperate. I'm sorry, she said, looking back and forth between us. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt anyone. But you did hurt someone, I said, standing up as well. You hurt me, you hurt your father, and you hurt yourself, though you're probably too selfish to realize it yet. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up the manila envelope I'd prepared earlier. Inside were printouts of Emily's credit card statements, copies of her emails with Pumper, and photographs I'd taken of them together at Marcello's. Here, I said, dropping the envelope in front of her. In case you want to see how this looks from the outside. Emily opened the envelope with shaking hands, her face going white as she saw the evidence of her betrayal laid out in black and white. Sam, she whispered, what are you going to do? I looked at my wife of 12 years, this woman I'd loved, trusted, built a life with, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. I'm going to give you a choice, Emily. You can end this thing with Pumper, and we can try to work on our marriage, or you can move out and we can start divorce proceedings. But either way, the lying stops now. And if I choose Nick, then you'd better hope he's worth it, I said, because you're going to lose a lot more than just your marriage. Emily looked at her father, who was staring at her with disappointment and disgust written across his weathered features. Dad? She said softly. Don't, George said, shaking his head. Don't ask me to choose sides, Emily. You made your choice when you decided to betray your husband and lie to your family. He walked to the front door, then turned back to look at both of us. Sam, I'm sorry. You deserved better than this. After George left, Emily and I sat in silence for a long time, the ruins of our dinner growing cold on the table between us. What happens now? Emily asked finally. Now you decide what's more important to you, I said. Your marriage or your boyfriend. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple, I interrupted. You can't have both, Emily. Those days are over. She nodded slowly, tears still streaming down her face. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow night, I said. After that, I make the decision for you. I left her sitting at the dining room table, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal, and went upstairs to the guest bedroom. For the first time in months, I slept soundly, dreaming of boxing matches and legal briefs going up in flames. Monday morning brought unseasonably warm weather and the kind of clarity that comes after a storm. Emily was gone when I woke up, her car missing from the driveway, her side of the bed unslept in. She'd made her choice, apparently. I called in sick to work, the first time I'd used a personal day for anything other than the flu in 3 years, and drove to Red's gym. If I was going to be a divorced man by the end of the week, I figured I might as well start acting like one. Red's gym occupied the bottom floor of a converted warehouse in the industrial part of town, the kind of place where serious fighters came to train and weekend warriors came to pretend they were tough. Red himself was a 60-year-old former middleweight who'd taken more punches than he'd given, but he knew how to teach the sweet science better than anyone in the state. Sammy, Red called out as I walked through the door. What are you doing here on a Monday morning? Shouldn't you be at work, making the world safe from mechanical engineering? Long story, Red, I said, pulling on my gloves. Let's just say I need to hit something. Red took one look at my face and nodded toward the heavy bags. Third one from the left. She's been giving everyone trouble today. Might be just what you need. For the next hour, I pounded out my frustrations on a 150-pound bag filled with sand and sawdust. Left hook, right cross, uppercut, repeat. The familiar rhythm of violence helped clear my head and focus my anger into something useful. By the time I finished, I had a plan. I showered at the gym and drove downtown to Patterson Klein and Associates. This time, I wasn't there to gather intelligence or set traps. This time, I was there to declare war. The same blonde receptionist was at the front desk, but her smile faltered when she saw my expression. "Is Emily Carter in?" I asked. Let me check," she stammered, reaching for her phone. "Don't bother," I said, walking past her toward the elevators. "I know where her office is." Emily's office was on the south side of the building, a corner space with windows that looked out over the city. She was sitting behind her desk, talking on the phone, when I walked in without knocking. "I'll have to call you back," she said into the phone, hanging up quickly. "Sam, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk. I'm at work." "I don't care," I said, closing the door behind me. "You didn't come home last night." Emily's face flushed. "I stayed at a hotel. I needed time to think." "Did you? Or did you need time to screw your boyfriend?" "Keep your voice down," Emily hissed, glancing toward the glass wall that separated her office from the hallway. "People can hear you." "Good," I said, not lowering my voice at all. "Maybe it's time people knew what kind of person you really are." Emily stood up from her desk, her face pale but determined. "Sam, please, can we do this at home?" "This is home for you, isn't it?" I gestured around her office, taking in the expensive furniture, the law books, the diplomas on the wall. "This is where you'd rather be than with your husband." "That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, and it sounded harsh in the quiet office. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I've been working my ass off to support your career while you've been screwing around with junior partners? Is it fair that you've been lying to your father, making him think you were helping with his taxes when you were really spreading your legs for some gym rat in an expensive suit?" Emily's face went white, then red. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Call you out for being a cheating, lying—" The office door opened, interrupting my tirade. Nick Russo walked in without knocking, looking like he owned the place. He was even more impressive in person than he'd been from across the street. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of artificial tan that came from expensive salons and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "Emily, is everything okay?" he asked, then noticed me standing by the window. "Oh, you must be the husband." The husband? Like I was some inconvenient detail in their love story. "And you must be the asshole," I replied. Pumper's smile was sharp as a knife. "Actually, I'm Nick Russo. I'm sure Emily's mentioned me." "She's mentioned you," I said. "Though she left out the part about you being a slimy piece of shit who preys on married women." "Sam, please," Emily said, stepping between us. "Let's not do this here." "Why not here?" I asked. "This is where it started, right? Late nights at the office, working dinners, all those important meetings that were so much more important than your marriage?" Nick stepped closer, and I could smell his expensive cologne, the same scent that had been clinging to Emily's clothes for months. "Look, friend," he said, his voice condescending. "I understand you're upset, but Emily and I are adults. What happens between us—" I hit him. It wasn't a calculated punch, wasn't the kind of technical combination Red had been teaching me for the past 5 years. It was pure emotion, a right cross that started somewhere around my ankles and ended with Nick Russo's nose making a wet crunching sound. He went down hard, his nose bleeding, his expensive suit rumpled and stained. Emily screamed, and somewhere in the back of my mind I registered the sound of running footsteps in the hallway outside. "You broke my nose!" Nick gasped, holding his hands to his face. Good, I said, shaking the sting out of my knuckles. Maybe next time you'll think twice before screwing another man's wife. The office filled with people, other lawyers, secretaries, security guards. Someone was calling for an ambulance. Someone else was threatening to call the police. Through it all, Emily stood frozen beside her desk, staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe the Sam Carter she'd married 12 years ago would never have punched someone in a law office, would never have made a scene that would be talked about in legal circles for months to come. But that Sam Carter had trusted his wife. That Sam Carter had believed in happily ever after. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, one of the security guards said, taking my arm. I was just leaving, I said, looking at Emily one last time. Enjoy your boyfriend, Emily. I hope he was worth it. I walked out of Patterson, Klein & Associates with my head held high, past the staring lawyers and whispering secretaries, past the receptionist who was frantically making phone calls, past the elevators full of people who would be gossiping about this for weeks. In the parking garage, I sat in my truck for a few minutes, letting the adrenaline fade. My right hand was already starting to swell, and I'd probably need ice when I got home. But it had been worth it to see the look on Pumper's face when he realized that not everyone was impressed by his expensive suit and his junior partnership. My phone rang as I was pulling out of the parking garage. Emily. Sam, we need to talk. No, we don't, I said. I think we've said everything that needs to be said. You can't just punch people, Sam. Nick might press charges. Let him. I'd love to explain to a judge why I hit him. This is insane. You're acting like a crazy person. I'm acting like a man whose wife has been cheating on him for months, I said. If that makes me crazy, so be it. Sam, please, come home tonight. Let's talk about this like adults. Adults? I laughed. Emily, adults don't lie to their spouses. Adults don't sneak around behind their husband's back. Adults don't make their father-in-law complicit in their lies. I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen, and now you have to live with the consequences. I hung up and drove home, my hand throbbing but my conscience clear. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, not the oblivious husband who'd been too stupid to see what was happening under his own nose, but the man who fixed problems and didn't take shit from anyone. That afternoon, I called a lawyer. Margaret Chen had handled my parents' estate when they died in a car accident 10 years ago, and she'd been straight with me then about what to expect from the legal system. She was in her 50s, tough as nails, and had a reputation for being fair but ruthless when the situation called for it. Sam Carter, she said when I walked into her office. I haven't seen you since your parents' probate. What can I do for you? I need a divorce attorney. Margaret's expression didn't change, but she gestured to the chair across from her desk. Tell me what's going on. I told her everything, the lies, the affair, the confrontation at Emily's office. Margaret listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. How long has this been going on? She asked when I finished. At least 4 months, maybe longer. Do you have evidence? I pulled out copies of the emails, credit card statements, and photographs I'd gathered. Margaret reviewed them carefully, her expression growing grimmer with each page. This is pretty damning, she said finally. Your wife wasn't very careful about covering her tracks. What are my options? Well, you could try counseling, see if the marriage is salvageable. It's not. Margaret nodded. Then we file for divorce. Illinois is a no-fault state, so the adultery won't affect the legal proceedings, but it might influence how the judge views asset distribution. What about the house? Depends on a lot of factors. How long have you been married? Who contributed what to the down payment? Whether there are any children involved? Margaret looked up from her notes. You mentioned your wife is a lawyer? Associate at Patterson, Klein & Associates. I know the firm. They're not going to be happy about what happened today. Punching a junior partner reflects badly on the whole organization. Good. Margaret smiled for the first time since I'd walked into her office. Sam, I have to ask. Do you want to try to save this marriage, or do you want to destroy your wife? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since Sunday night. I want her to understand that actions have consequences, I said finally. She thought she could have her cake and eat it too, keep the stability of marriage while getting her thrills on the side. I want her to learn that life doesn't work that way. That's not the same as destroying her. No, but it's not the same as saving the marriage either. Margaret nodded slowly. All right, let's talk about strategy. We spent the next hour going over my options, discussing timelines and procedures, talking about asset division and alimony payments. By the time I left Margaret's office, I had a clear picture of what the next few months would look like: paperwork and court dates, mediation sessions, and settlement negotiations. It wasn't going to be pleasant, but it was going to be final. That evening, Emily came home at her usual time, carrying Chinese takeout and looking like she'd aged 10 years since morning. Her eyes were red from crying, and she moved carefully, like someone recovering from a physical injury. "How's your boyfriend's nose?" I asked from the living room couch. "Sam, we need to talk." "I already told you, we don't have anything to talk about." Emily set the takeout bags on the coffee table and sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap like a child about to be scolded. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "about making a choice. And? I want to try to save our marriage." I looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in months. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago, when she was a paralegal with big dreams, and I was a junior engineer with calloused hands and a second-hand engagement ring. But something fundamental had changed between us, something that couldn't be fixed with apologies and promises. "It's too late for that," I said. "Sam, please, I made a mistake." "You made a choice," I corrected. "Every time you lied to me, every time you met him for lunch, every time you came home smelling like his cologne, those were all choices, and now I'm making mine." I pulled out the business card Margaret had given me and set it on the coffee table next to the Chinese food. "Margaret Chen, divorce attorney. She's expecting your call." Emily stared at the business card like it was a final notice. "You've already filed?" "Not yet, but I will, first thing tomorrow morning." "What about counseling? What about trying to work this out?" "Emily, you spent last night in a hotel room with another man while I was at home wondering if my marriage was over. There's nothing to work out." She started crying then, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to pull her into my arms and tell her everything would be okay. But that part was getting smaller every day, overwhelmed by anger and disappointment and the cold satisfaction of finally taking control of my own life. "I love you," she said through her tears. "No, you don't," I said quietly. "You love the idea of me, the stability, the security, the backup plan, but you don't love me enough to be faithful to me." "That's not true." "Then why did you do it? Why did you risk everything we had for some gym rat in an expensive suit?" Emily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup. "I don't know. I was lonely, and he made me feel special, and I thought I could have both." "Well, now you get to find out what it's like to have neither." I stood up from the couch, suddenly exhausted by the whole conversation. "I'm staying at George's tonight," I said. "Tomorrow I'll come back for my things." "Sam, wait." But I was already walking toward the door, my keys in my hand, and my conscience finally clear. Behind me, Emily was still crying, still calling my name, still trying to undo months of lies with a few minutes of tears. It was too late for that. It had been too late from the moment she'd whispered into her phone about clubs and meetings and husbands who suspected nothing. Now she'd learn what it felt like to be the one left behind, wondering what went wrong and whether things could have been different. The answer was yes, they could have been different. All she'd had to do was tell the truth. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of legal paperwork and awkward conversations. I moved into George's spare bedroom temporarily, sleeping in the same twin bed Emily had used during high school, surrounded by her old cheerleading trophies and honor roll certificates, reminders of the woman I'd thought I'd married. Margaret filed the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning, and Emily was served at her office that afternoon. According to George, who still talked to his daughter despite his disappointment, she'd locked herself in her office and cried for 2 hours after the process server left. I felt bad about that for approximately 30 seconds. The fallout at Patterson, Klein and Associates was swift and brutal. Word of the affair had spread through the firm like wildfire, and the senior partners weren't amused by the negative publicity. Emily was reassigned to less prestigious cases, her path to partnership effectively blocked. Pumper, meanwhile, was facing his own problems, a formal complaint to the State Bar Association and a very expensive rhinoplasty to repair his broken nose. But the real consequences were just beginning. On a Thursday evening, I was at Red's gym working through my aggression on the heavy bags when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Murphy's Bar on 5th Street. 8 p.m. We need to talk. Becca Walsh." Becca Walsh. The HR manager from Emily's firm who'd been so helpful when I was looking for my cheating wife. I'd been wondering when she'd surface again. Murphy's Bar was the kind of dive that served beer in bottles and whiskey in plastic cups, where the lighting was dim enough to hide your shame and the jukebox played nothing but country songs about cheating hearts and broken dreams. I found Becca in a corner booth, nursing what looked like her second or third drink. "Sam," she said, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. "Thanks for coming." "What do you want, Becca?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Straight to the point. I like that about you. Answer the question." Becca took a long sip of her drink, whiskey, neat, and studied my face in the dim light. "I want to tell you a story about your wife and her boyfriend." "I already know that story." "No," Becca said, leaning forward. "You know the ending, but you don't know how it started, or who helped write the script." I signaled the bartender for a beer and settled back in my seat. "I'm listening." "Emily and I have worked together for 3 years," Becca began. "We were friends, or at least I thought we were. We had lunch together, complained about the partners together, even went out for drinks after work sometimes. Sounds cozy. It was, until Emily got the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years, the Hartwell Industries account, biggest client the firm had landed in a decade. I'd been cultivating that relationship for months, but Emily swooped in at the last minute and took credit for my work. I was starting to see where this was going. "So you decided to get revenge." "I decided to give Emily exactly what she deserved," Becca corrected. "See, I knew about her marriage problems. She complained about you constantly, how you were boring, how you didn't understand her career ambitions, how you were more interested in your gym than in her success. And you saw an opportunity." Becca's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I saw a woman who was ripe for making very bad decisions. All she needed was the right push." Nick Russo. Pumper's always been a predator. He goes through the support staff like a revolving door, leaving broken hearts and complaints in his wake. But he'd never gone after a married woman before. Too much potential for drama. Until you convinced him to go after Emily. I didn't have to convince him of anything. I just made sure they ended up in the same place at the same time, made sure Emily was feeling particularly vulnerable, made sure Pumper knew she was having marital problems. Becca finished her drink and signaled for another. After that, nature took its course. I stared at this woman, this stranger who'd orchestrated the destruction of my marriage like she was directing a play, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that Emily isn't the only guilty party here. She made her choices, but I made sure she had the opportunity to make them. And now you want what? Forgiveness? Absolution? Becca laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I want you to know that your wife isn't just a cheater, Sam. She's an idiot. She had a good man, a stable marriage, a decent life, and she threw it all away for a few months of excitement with a man who's already moved on to his next conquest. Pumper dumped her? The day after you broke his nose. Apparently, married women aren't as appealing when they come with violent husbands and messy divorces. I should have felt satisfaction at that news, but instead, I felt something like pity. Emily had lost everything: her marriage, her career prospects, her lover. And for what? A few stolen afternoons with a man who'd discarded her the moment things got complicated. There's something else you should know, Becca said, leaning across the table. Emily's been asking questions about you, about your finances, your assets, what kind of settlement she might expect in the divorce. Let me guess, she's planning to take me for everything I'm worth. She's planning to try. But here's the thing, Sam. I have access to the firm's HR files. I know exactly how much Emily makes, how much she's spent on her affair, how much debt she's racked up trying to keep up with Pumper's expensive lifestyle. Becca reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. Credit reports, bank statements, expense accounts, everything your lawyer will need to prove that Emily's been financing her affair with marital assets. I opened the envelope and scanned the documents inside. Emily had been living far beyond her means for months. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, hotel rooms that cost more per night than I made in a week. All of it charged to credit cards that were technically joint marital debt. Why are you helping me? Because Emily destroyed my career, and now I'm returning the favor. She thought she was so smart, so careful. She never realized that the person helping her cover her tracks was also documenting every lie, every expense, every stupid decision. Becca stood up from the booth, leaving a 20 on the table for her drinks. Emily's going to try to paint herself as the victim in all this, Sam. The neglected wife, the woman who was driven into another man's arms by her husband's indifference. Don't let her get away with it. After Becca left, I sat in Murphy's bar for another hour, nursing my beer and thinking about the strange turns my life had taken. 3 months ago, I'd been a happily married man who trusted his wife and believed in forever. Now, I was sitting in a dive bar, accepting evidence of my wife's betrayal from a woman who'd orchestrated the whole thing out of professional jealousy. It was like something out of a bad movie, except it was my life. The next morning, I took Becca's envelope to Margaret Chen's office. She reviewed the documents with the same careful attention she'd given everything else in my case, her expression growing grimmer with each page. "This is very helpful," she said finally. "Your wife's been spending marital assets to finance her affair, which gives us significant leverage in settlement negotiations." "What kind of leverage?" "The kind where she walks away with a lot less than she's expecting," Margaret said with a satisfied smile. "Emily's lawyer is going to have a very bad day when we present this evidence." That afternoon, I got a call from Emily. She was crying before I even answered the phone. "Sam, please, we need to talk, face to face." "We have lawyers for that now." "This isn't about the divorce. This is about us, about what we meant to each other." Despite everything that had happened, despite all the lies and betrayals and broken promises, something in her voice made me agree to meet her. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the need for closure, or maybe I was just a sucker for a crying woman. We met at the coffee shop where we'd had our first date 15 years ago, a little place called Grounds for Divorce that had seemed funny back when we were young and in love and thought we'd beat the odds. Emily looked terrible. She'd lost weight, her clothes hung loose on her frame, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Thank you for coming," she said when I sat down across from her. What do you want, Emily? I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just the bullshit I tried to feed you before. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. I screwed up, Sam. I screwed up so badly that I don't even recognize the person I became. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to be the truth. Emily looked up at me, and I could see genuine pain in her eyes. I know you probably won't believe this, but I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen. Yes, it did. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life. She took a shaky breath. Nick broke up with me. I heard. Did you also hear that the firm's going to let me go? Not officially, of course. They'll wait until after the divorce is final, then find some excuse to push me out. But my career there is over. I should have felt triumphant, but instead I just felt tired. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Really? I considered the question seriously. Emily had betrayed me, lied to me, humiliated me in front of her father and our friends. She'd thrown away 12 years of marriage for a few months of excitement with a man who'd discarded her the moment things got complicated. But she'd also been the woman I'd loved for 15 years, the woman I'd planned to grow old with, the woman who used to curl up against my side on Sunday mornings and steal bites of my pancakes. Yeah, I said finally. I am sorry. Not sorry enough to call off the divorce, but sorry that it came to this. Emily started crying then, quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks and dripped into her coffee. I lost everything, Sam. My marriage, my career, my self-respect. And for what? For a man who never cared about me, who was just using me for companionship and pleasure. Emily, no. Let me finish. I need to say this. She wiped her eyes with a napkin, smearing her mascara. I convinced myself that you didn't love me anymore, that our marriage was over anyway, that I deserved to be happy, even if it meant betraying you. But the truth is, I was just selfish. I wanted excitement. I wanted to feel desired, and I didn't care who got hurt in the process. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved a wife who was faithful, who was honest, who appreciated what she had instead of always looking for something more. We sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the ghosts of better times. This was the table where Sam had proposed, where we'd planned our wedding, where we'd talked about buying our first house and maybe starting a family someday. All of that was gone now, destroyed by lies and betrayal and the kind of selfishness that couldn't be forgiven. The divorce papers say you want half of everything, I said finally. Emily's face flushed. My lawyer says I'm entitled. Your lawyer doesn't know about the credit card statements, the hotel receipts, the fact that you've been spending our money to finance your affair. Emily went pale. Sam, you want to know what you're entitled to, Emily? You're entitled to whatever I decide to give you out of the goodness of my heart. Because legally, you've been stealing from our marriage to pay for your boyfriend's entertainment. That's not how it was. That's exactly how it was. And that's how it's going to look to a judge if this goes to trial. Emily stared at me across the small table, and I could see the moment when she realized that her leverage in the divorce had just evaporated. What do you want? She asked quietly. I want you to sign whatever settlement agreement my lawyer puts in front of you. I want you to take responsibility for your own debts and your own choices. And I want you to stop pretending that you're the victim in this story. And if I do that, then I won't pursue criminal charges for the money you stole from our joint accounts. It was a bluff. Margaret had told me that criminal charges were unlikely given the circumstances, but Emily didn't know that. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Okay. I stood up from the table, looking down at the woman who had been my wife, who had shared my bed and my dreams and my hopes for the future. Goodbye, Emily. Sam, wait. She reached out and grabbed my hand, her fingers cold and trembling. Do you think Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I looked into her eyes, the same brown eyes I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago, and felt something like peace settle over me. I already have, I said. But that doesn't mean I'm willing to forget. I left Emily sitting in that coffee shop, surrounded by the ruins of our shared past, and walked out into the afternoon sunshine feeling lighter than I had in months. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. Emily signed the settlement agreement without protest, taking only her personal belongings and her car. The house, the savings account, the retirement funds, everything we'd built together over 12 years of marriage, stayed with me. It should have felt like victory, but mostly it just felt like the end of a very long, very painful chapter. George helped me move Emily's remaining belongings out of the house, packing her clothes and books and keepsakes into boxes that she would pick up later. We worked in silence mostly, two men cleaning up the mess left behind by someone we'd both loved and lost. You know, George said as we loaded the last box into his truck, I'm proud of you, Sam. For what? For handling this with dignity, for not letting her destroy you along with everything else. I looked at the house Emily and I had shared, our first real home together, the place where we'd been happy before everything went wrong, and felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. She didn't destroy me, George. She just showed me who she really was. And who are you now? It was a good question, and one I'd been asking myself for weeks. I wasn't the trusting husband I'd been 6 months ago, but I wasn't the angry, bitter man I'd become immediately after discovering the affair either. I was something new, something harder, but maybe wiser. I was a man who'd learned that love without trust was just elaborate self-deception, and that sometimes the kindest thing you could do for someone was to let them face the consequences of their choices. I'm a man who knows what he's worth, I said finally, and what he won't accept. George nodded approvingly. That's a good place to start. That evening, I sat on my front porch, my porch now, not ours, and watched the sun set over the suburban neighborhood where Emily and I had planned to grow old together. The house felt different without her presence, quieter, but also more peaceful. My phone buzzed with a text message from Red. Gym's open late tonight if you need to hit something. I smiled and typed back, thanks, but I think I'm done hitting things for a while. And I was. The anger that had sustained me through the divorce proceedings was finally starting to fade, replaced by something that felt like acceptance. Emily had made her choices, and I had made mine. The consequences had played out exactly as they should have. She'd lost her marriage, her career prospects, and her self-respect. I'd lost my wife and my faith in happily ever after, but I'd gained something too. The knowledge that I was stronger than I'd thought, more resilient than I'd imagined. It wasn't the ending I'd planned for my story, but it was an ending I could live with. And sometimes, that's enough.